Structuring your thesis. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Josh. I work in the CDU campus, Casuarina. I pay my respects to Larrakia elders past, present, and emerging. And if you hang around for the next half an hour, you'll get to see an overview of thesis types, some of the components that make them up. We'll have a brief look at some language in thesis outlines and in theses. I'll give you some of my hot tips for how to put your thesis together, plug you into some useful tools, and then show you how you can access resources related to this from the university. Before we start, though, I'd like to introduce myself properly and do a little disclaimer. As I said, I work in the library. I'm a learning advisor. While I do work together with students from all disciplines, I'm not really an expert in any of the disciplines apart from my own. Every discipline structures their thesis and organizes their research and writes up their papers differently. It's up to you to learn the nuances of your discipline. So please take this in the good advice spirit that it's given. Your supervisor can overrule anything that I say, and you should construct your thesis in concert with them. So before we start, I'd like to do a little group activity. There's no group here today, but the questions can still stand. So before we begin, what stage of the research process are you in? Are you more towards the beginning? Are you still doing your reading, etc.? What's your topic? What are you investigating, and how are you investigating it? And how confident are you about how to structure your thesis overall? If you're on the lower end of the confidence scale, you might give yourself a 1. You're on the higher end, you might give yourself a 10. But think about those 3 questions for a minute, and then we'll kick off. So I'm guessing that you've ranked yourself somewhere in the yellow, orange, or red section. My aim for this session is just to nudge you forward 1 or 2 shades on that scale. So let's hit it. In the beginning, you would have noticed something like this, the milestones of a full-time PhD track at CDU. I realize some of you might be doing master's theses, but it's essentially that, except, condensed to about half the time. And I'm assuming that you've already applied and that you're in the process of doing your supervision agreement now. The next thing that you'll have to do is this confirmation of candidature, which will require a full research proposal. But you don't get there until you've sat together and nutted out how to organize and structure your thesis and plan your research. If you want to read more about these milestones, you can go to this QR code, and you'll find that this QR code link is something that I'll do a lot for the rest of this session. It's much easier to give you a scannable QR code than it is to give you a URL. So if you want to check the CDU milestones, go ahead and do it through that link. Now, in the beginning, I thought I would just test you with 3 easy, simple questions. So how many words does a master's thesis at CDU require? PhD thesis. And finally, is it compulsory to publish at least 1 article during your study? Choose A, B, or C. Okay. So for the word limits, CDU policies state a maximum word limit of 50,000 for a master's and 100,000 for a PhD. I think it's interesting to note that they don't specify a minimum word limit. So what that tells me is that they care more about you not writing too much than for you writing under length. So your PhD would be somewhere between 50 and 100,000 words, and your master's would be somewhere between, let's say, 30 and 50,000 words. This one down here, is it compulsory to publish an article during your study? No, you are perfectly welcome to go through your whole study, write a monograph type thesis, and not publish anything and still be awarded your degree. Just food for thought. So when we're considering the structure of a thesis, I look at it from 3 angles or 3 lenses. The macro level, which is the big picture. So how each section flows from one section to the next and how they hang together. Then there's the meta level, which is the headings, subheadings as a part of your outline, and perhaps the themes that the way that you've organized your themes in your literature review or in the presentation of your results or the discussion of your results. And the micro stuff we won't do too much of today, but that's essentially how sentences and paragraphs might sort of hang together. What factors influence your thesis structure? A lot. So your research design will be the primary influence. There will also be expectations within your discipline and within your university about how to set it up. Your supervisor might have their own feelings about how to structure your thesis, and we might lean very heavily into their advice. You also might be influenced by what you expect to do in the future, the expectations for your future. But at the end of the day, it's your study and you are the boss of it. People like me or your supervisor or your colleagues, we can give the best advice that we can, but final call lies with you. So according to my reading, there's 3 basic types of structure. You've got the traditional style thesis. Some people call it an IMRAD, introduction, methods, results, and discussion. Then there's the topic-based or creative practice-led type thesis that have an introduction and a discussion, but they've divided their thesis up into themed topics. And then there's the publication-based thesis, which is essentially a traditional IMRAD or monograph, but it's broken up with independent research articles that are all related into the same theme. If you want to read more about the basic structure types, you can go to student theses at the researchers page at CDU. Now, the traditional thesis, the one that most people are familiar with, will start out with introduction, have some kind of a lit review, methodology, results, discussion, conclusion. And then you'll have supplementary material at the bottom, references and appendices. Now, interestingly, disciplines do this a little differently. I'm working with some master students from engineering, and their supervisor wants them to put the literature review down here in the appendices. Also, I'm working in another discipline where they combine the results section and the discussions section together. They sort of mush them together. So it really is situation based. You need to sort of investigate how things work in your discipline. So it's 100,000 words max for a PhD, 50,000 max for a master's. And if you want to read more about this traditional style, you can read about the rules in the policy here. Then we've got the topic-based thesis, and this is for more the artists or the creative practice-led kind of folk. Now, an artifact exegesis thesis would be a piece of creative work. Now, this can be something that's created by the student, or it could be an established, already created work by another artist. And then you have a defense or an exegesis, where you sort of break that piece of work down, describe it, the purpose, the development, compare it to other works, etc. Please note, in this kind of thesis, the maximum is 50,000 words for a PhD. So I imagine it's half the length of a traditional IMRAD thesis because of the demands of creating a piece of work that is in line with the standard works in the genre. If you want to read more about topic-based thesis, you can read Moss's Should I Write a Thesis by Creative Works, and you can download that document here. Then we've got the publication-based thesis, which is essentially a traditional monograph, IMRAD, but the body of it is broken up into independent standalone papers that all need to be related by a theme. You can't take some paper that's that doesn't fit with the other ones for some reason. Interestingly, they don't all need to be published, so that's not a requirement. It's good if they are, but they don't have to be. Now, there's two ways to go about a publication-based thesis. You can do future publications. So let's say you're a student who is going to publish a number of papers before they get to the end of their thesis. And then there's prior publication. So you might have already finished a couple of papers. And as a part of your PhD studies here, you're going to go ahead and publish 2 more, and that'll be how you put your thesis together. If you want to read more about prospective publication, you can do it in this link. And if you want to read about prior publication, you can do it here. So, little activity to get us started. Here are 3 sample outlines. Download them, read them, and tell me which one is a traditional thesis, which one's a topic-based thesis, and which one is a publication-based thesis. Take a few minutes for that, guys. Get comfy with your answers, and when you want to continue, unpause the video. Okay, so the first one contains a bunch of independent papers. So it's a tradition. It's sorry, the traditional thesis is the sample C. You can see it follows a regular IMRAD structure. Topic-based thesis is B. Each one of these parts is divided into a themed topic, and the publication-based thesis with the standalone papers is A. Now the components, you would have seen these before. Title page, table of contents, abstract, introduction, lit review, methodology, results, discussion, conclusion, recommendations, references, appendices. On the right here, we've got a description for each of those parts. I hope you don't think I'm being patronizing, but go ahead and match these descriptions up with their parts. Take a few minutes. And if you do it correctly, the letters in the finished answer will spell a word. Take a few minutes, match those parts up, see if you can get a word out of it. All right. So it's housewarming, basically. A non-repeating word. I'll let you go through and double check your answers, but if you've got housewarming, then good for you. Now, part of the whole, thesis structure, an important part of it, is getting your outline happening from the beginning. You might know already that you're going to do a thesis by topics, or a thesis by publication, thesis by IMRAD, right? So get a working outline, a basic outline going as soon as you can. Now, in an ordinary research process, you might identify the problem first. Most research stems out of some kind of problem or a desire to fix a problem. So you do a review of the literature, you find a problem that you're interested in, you identify a gap. Based on that, you make a research question or more, and then you go ahead and make some research aims and objectives to match that. Then you figure your approach out. Now that you've got research question and research objectives and aims, you decide which theoretical framework is best to pursue. You want to review different kinds of methodology and choose appropriate ones and think about how feasible this study will be. Then you get a basic outline happening. At this stage, it'll just be a single level multi-part outline. Typically, if you're in the social sciences, for example, you might end up with something that looks like that. Then you take it to your supervisor and you say, hey, what's up? What do you think? And you get some feedback from your supervisor or from other colleagues in the field as soon as possible, and know that your outline is a living document, a work in progress. And it's probably going to change multiple times before you get to the end of the process. Your title will probably change multiple times before you get to the end of the process. So just be flexible. Now, I'll give you an activity in a minute, but just for the purposes of setting this activity up, I want to introduce you to a fictional student called Emma. Emma's some kind of scientist in the hard sciences, and she really doesn't like secondhand smoke. That's the problem that it bugs her the most. She wants to spend her PhD doing something useful, so she's decided to base it around the health risks of secondhand smoke in public places in Australia. So she notices that even though smoking is banned, people still do it and they don't follow the rules. So her research question is, how effective are bans of public smoking in reducing secondhand smoke exposure? She's keeping her design nice and elegant. She's got a single question. She can build her objectives and her aims around that. When considering her approach, she decides to frame it using public health policy and behavioral compliance models. She finds that the best methodology to adopt in order to answer her research question is mixed methods. She's going to analyze some policy documents. She's going to take some air measurements. And she's going to survey and interview people from the public and also the people who make laws. She gets together with her supervisor, decides what it's the most worthwhile, doable, feasible way to go about this, puts a basic outline together, something that looks like this. In concert with her supervisor, she refines and makes adjustments to it. And then after that, she can go ahead and start doing a proper lit review or designing the instruments. So yeah, I just thought it'd be nice to take you through that process. But after she's finished writing up her thesis, she's still got these main sections: introduction, lit review, methodology, results, discussion, and conclusion. And these are little excerpts from each of those sections in a different order. Your job: read the excerpt of language and tell me which section of the thesis is it most likely to come from. Take a few minutes, guys. Unpause the video when you're ready to continue. So this first one, findings suggesting something, and policymakers should, that's a discussion if I've ever seen one. It's talking about what the results suggest, and it's the implications and recommendations. Next one, I'm seeing citations to literature here. So that'll be literature review. This one here, the telltale for this is that it's talking about the aims. It's introducing the aims, so that would be introduction. This sounds conclusive. It sounds like something at the end. This research highlights this, future studies should do this. I guess that's conclusion. This looks quite technical. So it's either results or methodology. This is talking about how the data was collected. So that would be methodology. And this one containing percentages would be straight up results. So yeah, each of the sections has its sort of own flavor, and it's good to keep that in mind as we move forward. Now we have some good workshops for the kind of language that's expected of you in academic writing. So I won't go into too much detail about it today, but just from a ground up basic level, if you're talking about research in the past, in your thesis or in your proposal for your thesis or in your outline, we usually do that in the past tense, unless it's research which is still relevant now. So completed research comes in the past tense. When we're describing our problem, our objectives, and our significance, we use the present tense. And when we're talking about the methods and the expected outcomes in a proposal before you've done it, before you've carried out the research, or any recommendations to address the limitations in research, would use future tense. Just in general. Now, you're trying to maintain a formal, objective tone throughout your proposal, throughout your thesis, the drafting process. So we don't want to say things like this result is super important for everyone. Better to say this finding has significant implications for policymakers, etc. Not, I think this is the best approach. The findings suggest this approach is most effective. So I don't want to spend too long on the micro aspects of the language. If you want a fuller look at how academic writing is different from other kinds of writing, you can go to our study skills page and access some self-access materials on that there. But just in general, in our outline and in the text of our thesis, we want to avoid personal language and focus more on impersonal language. We want to avoid subjective language or tones and focus more on objective. We don't want to be informal. We want to keep it as formal as we can. If you want a fuller list of these rules or do some practice activities of what the difference between formal language and informal language and what's allowed and what's not, go and see our study skills page on that. But in terms of big picture cohesion, I suppose, coherence, the logical flow or progression from one part of your thesis to the next, that's important, I think. It should all hang together in a logical way. So that when you're making a section in your outline, remember that it's good at the end of a section or at the end of a chapter to briefly set up the next chapter. So you might say something like, this part has highlighted ABC, and the next part will do XYZ. So it's good at the end of a chapter, or I might call it a section, to wrap up what you've done in that chapter and introduce the next one. Similarly, at the beginning of chapters, you might summarize what came in the previous chapter and set up the current one. Someone might put their hand up at this stage and say, but Josh, won't it get a little bit repetitive? Yeah, it might. If you, at the end of one chapter, summarize and introduce the next one, and then you kind of do the same thing at the beginning of the next chapter, there's going to be a bit of repetition there. And don't use the exact same words. But I think it's permissible in a long document because a lot of people, hardly anyone actually, starts at the beginning of a thesis and reads it through word for word to the end. Most people know what they're looking for when they're reading it. They just want to get straight to the methodology section and look at that. So that's why I think it's okay to have a bit of repetition at the beginning and ending of your chapters. And then in the middle, in the middle of your chapters or in the middle of your sections or paragraphs, you'll have signposting language that kind of makes the different elements of that paragraph hang together in a more cohesive flow. So just a quickie. Let's say we've got 3 positions on the left here: chapter ending, chapter beginning, and internal signposting, and 3 chunks of language over here. Take a minute, put those chunks of language into the appropriate place. So yeah, this would be a chapter ending, this would be a chapter beginning, and this would be some kind of cohesive device or transition language in the middle of a paragraph. Now, I won't get you to do it, but if we took something within a section, within a paragraph like this, and read through it, we might see that it also doesn't hang together or flow together well. Secondhand smoke exposure is harmful. Public awareness is low. Smoking bans have been introduced. Policymakers focus on designated smoking areas. Some people ignore the rules. It's very choppy, it sort of jumps from one topic to the next without any real lubrication. So when we're talking about overall flow, we're not just talking about linking sections and chapters together, we're also looking at how it hangs together on a paragraph level, sentence by sentence. So if I said, take these four cohesive devices and insert them into their correct spot in that paragraph in order to make it hang together better, you might say something like, however goes here, to address this goes here, with goes there, but we'd have to change focus to focusing, and despite these efforts might go there. Again, this is more micro language, but it's nice to look at in terms of making a thesis hang together. But for now, you're in the outlining stage, or you should be in the outlining stage. So it's important to structure your thesis with clear, logical, and effective headings and subheadings. So if I gave you this green outline and this blue one, said, which one do you think is better? You would all say the blue one. And why? Well, your headings and subheadings in your outline should be clear and specific. They should reflect the content. They should have some kind of logical flow, and they should follow some verbiage rules or some language rules. It's not a case of more words is better. I just noticed that I've got some numbering issues going on here. I'm sure you'll forgive me for that. Yeah, but basically, when you're setting up an outline with headings and subheadings, there's four general rules. You can bend them a little bit. You could even break them in some places, but it's good to keep them in mind for four components of effective outlines. First rule, parallelism. Second one, coordination. Third, subordination. Fourth one, division. So the first rule is that if you've got a heading or a subheading that is a certain word class, like a verb, it's nice if all of its brothers and sisters in that heading or subheading can be parallel. It's nice, So that's an example of making verbs parallel, or your headings could be nouns that all sort of follow a similar structure. So while it's not a hard and fast rule, it's a good thing to aim for when you're making headings and subheadings in an outline. Parallelism. Next rule, coordination. This is about the value of each heading, pretty much. And the rule is that headings and subheadings should be of similar significance to their brothers and sisters. So if I've got section 1, find sources in the library, then the children of that section should be of, relatively equal importance. The main headings here should be roughly equally important, and the subheadings within those main headings equal importance. You wouldn't add C here and put something that's not so significant. So that's the rule of coordination. Again, bend it or break it if you like, but it's just a good principle to sort of aim for. Third one, subordination, is an easy one. If you've got a mother heading, then the children of that mother heading should all come from the mother. They should be subordinate to that mother heading. You would not, for example, add solutions to that one. Solutions would belong in a different family, right? So that's subordination. And the last one, division, probably the simplest one. If you're dividing a heading up or a subheading up, minimum 2. If a mother's going to have some children, she's got to have 2 or more. Mother's not allowed to just have a single child, right? In this case, we would remove that subheading and just keep the mother heading. So those are the 4 rules for effective outline components. Like I said, bend them or break them as you will, but good to keep in mind as you're drafting and improving your outline. The numbering format for your outline, most of the outlines that I see these days use the decimal format. So section 1, section 1.1, 1.2, etc. But when I was growing up, we used something called the alphanumeric outline. Main section headings were Roman numerals. Subheadings were capitalized letters, capitalized Greek letters. If we divided that section up, it would go down to numerals. These numerals have their origins in Arabic, if you didn't know. And if you divide those, it would become lowercase Greek letters. So we had Roman, Greek, and Arab, a big mix, a very, very confusing outlining system. But I'm sure you would have seen this one around, especially on older documents. It doesn't matter what kind of numbering system you use. I don't think your lecturer will insist on you using any particular one, but there are rules for capitalization, regardless of what you use. Now, the style that I'm most comfortable with is APA 7. It could be different in another style, but at least I think it's good general advice that for the main section headings, so introduction and the main body sections, we do a certain kind of capitalization. For the subsections or the second level headings, we capitalize them differently. Same with the third and subsequent level headings. So the general rule is for the main section headings, all caps. Second level headings, caps for the first letter of the significant words, not for prepositions or conjunctions. And for the third level headings, first letter caps, everything else small, unless it's a proper noun or after a piece of punctuation. So that's, in general, I think if you follow those capitalization rules, you're onto a winner. Overall, you should have a neat system. It should be uniform throughout, and it should kind of look good from a distance. I might just open up a Word document and show you a little hack for if you're going to make a nice neat outline. So let's say I've gone and conducted some research, and I've got 100 headings. If I don't want to mess around by manually typing in the page number for each of these when I'm making an outline, I can do this hack. I can designate the heading for each paragraph or section up here. So that's a main heading. I'm going to give it a subheading and another subheading. This one's another main heading, and I'll give it a subheading and a subheading. Now, once I've gone through and designated what each of my headings are in my long document, let's say it's 200 pages, this PhD, I've gone through and manually designated each kind of heading. Then I go back to the beginning, I go to references, click table of contents, do automatic table, and it's done it nice and neatly for me. It's put the headings, subheadings, page numbers all aligned. It's a very useful hack. Now, in terms of your paragraph structure, I think it's good if you can follow some kind of framework. Our CDU website seems to favor the PLC framework. So you, in a paragraph, come out and give your point. Then you give some evidence for the point. This would probably contain citation. Then you explain what you understand that citation to mean, or how you interpret that citation. Then at the end of the paragraph, you can link to the next paragraph, or link back to the thesis, or summarize or conclude this paragraph. That seems to be the one that is most popular here at CDU. But my favorite one is the T-cell. I like it because there are more parts and it's more logical, I think. In this one, it asks for the point and then the evidence first and then your explanation. In the T-cell, it kind of, you get to give your idea first before you support it and then analyze it. So the good old burger structure, but just upgraded a little bit. Start out by introducing the topic or the main point that you're getting to. You give examples from your own experience that you can support with, examples or evidence. But the heart of the paragraph or the heart of the burger is always the support. It's the citations that link to credible evidence from reputed sources. And of course, there'll be a citation. Then after that, you get to put your own source on it. So you can say what you understand that citation to mean, or how it supports the idea, or how you interpret it. So you could begin that sentence with a phrase like, this means that, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end, you have your linking or your transition to the next paragraph. So something like this. Social media can support success by helping students to be more tech savvy. Giving an example, this is from my own mind. If people use social media, then they're going to be better at using a computer. And I support it. According to Chen 2021, people who use social media are better at computers. Then I interpret it. This means that, with my own interpretation of that. And then I link or summarize or introduce the next chapter, or next paragraph. So, how about you do it? I'll give you a, well, actually, I think it could even be the same paragraph. Take a minute or so, scan this code, identify the parts of that paragraph. So there's 5 colored parts and there's 5 labeled parts. Scan that code and do that little activity and unpause when you're ready to continue. Okay, so the green part is the topic sentence, then the yellow is the examples, then at the heart, the meat of every paragraph is the support with the citation, then the analysis sentence, and then the link. TCEL, it's a nice framework for you to remember. If you've already got a framework you use, go ahead and use that one. But and every paragraph that you ever write doesn't need to follow this kind of structure, but it is nice to sort of have a template in your mind when you're beginning to write one. You know, for example, the first thing I always write is this green part. The second part I write is the red part, you know, and then I sort of build the rest of the paragraph around that. That's just how I do it. So some hot tips from me when you're trying to develop your thesis structure. The single best piece of advice that I can give to you or anyone is to go and read some other theses, you know, particularly ones that are in the close to the topic of what you're investigating. Sometimes in the beginning, it can be really nerve-wracking to be embarking on this big project, but all you got to do is find one good thesis that's close to your topic, and it can be the beginning of a really productive sort of research session. There's so many good reasons for it. A, you can see what other methodologies other researchers are using to answer research questions. B, you can steal their references from their reference list. They've already gathered together hundreds of other relevant articles, and you can borrow from those. C, you can see the kind of structure and formatting that they've used to lay out their thesis. It's really, really useful. So first things first, if you take nothing from this session at all, go and find a thesis that's within your field, save it into your referencing software, read it, and best of luck in your journey. Now, if we were all in a room, I would get you to physically go and do it now. First one, go to this link, find out how many PhD theses are available at CDU, and then go to each of these links and find a thesis domestically and internationally that's related to your study. Save them, put them into your referencing software, and boom, shankar. But since it's a video, I'll just get you to go and do that. But legit, guys, this piece of advice, that's the best I've got for you. Go and read one or more other theses within your field. Also, at the beginning, ask your supervisor or do a little search around to try and find your assessment rubric. So if you don't know, or you will know, any task at university is assessed using a metric. For example, if this is an essay rubric, you get a grade for the information, you get a grade for the organization, the vocab, the grammar, and the referencing, right? And you can score poorly or well within each of those bands. That's how they grade you. That's how they score you. Now, what can be really useful for you is to go and find the grading rubric for your thesis. There will be one. There will be one that, there has to be a system for how they evaluate extended pieces of writing in your field. Go and find it, and especially in the HD column, read what's expected of you in order to get that top grade. And each of these statements in that column need to be true for you to be awarded that score. So yeah, go and find your rubric and have a look at the beginning. Also, if you're an international student, please note that this section, language use, it's not worth as much as you think it is, and this is true across all written assessments at university. Students think it's worth half the grade or a quarter of the grade. No, it's usually worth 5–10%, something like that. The reason I mention it is because in my work, I see a lot of international students who are subconscious, self-conscious about their language, and they make it they prioritize that. It's more important to get the language correct than it is to answer the actual question or achieve the task properly. Just keep things in perspective, guys. The most important criteria is whether you've achieved the task, whether you've done a good critical analysis. Language, referencing and citation, these can be done later. In the beginning, you should be focusing on the ideas more than the language. I also think it's a hot piece of advice for you to visualize your structure when you're in the planning phase. You might do a little smart chart or a little handwritten diagram or something, including the timeline or a flow chart. This could be really useful, especially if your supervisor changes while you're doing your degree. It's very useful to be able to say, listen, mate, I've done phase 1, I'm in phase 2 right now, we got phase 3 next. It's a really good thing to be able to have this, and it helps you flesh out and understand your own research better. So make a little visual flowchart or diagram of the process, and also avoid mistakes like this. So I'll give you a minute. What do you think? Have a look at that and predict what I don't like about this. So yeah, I don't like how interdependent each of these papers are on how the rest of the research will carry on. For example, if this paper fails, it informs that, and it also informs that. So I won't be able to do that or that properly, right? So the issue here is that these individual elements or papers must succeed in order for this project to succeed. Whereas in this one, the phases are sort of independent. One of them could fail. You could just omit a whole phase, and the project could still go on. So keep that in mind when you're sort of planning out your research map. The other thing I would say is that you don't need to decide on whether you're doing a monograph or publication in the first year, in the first month, right? Probably your supervisor, chances are they will suggest that you do some publications along the way. Please note they have their own personal interests for doing that, and universities do as well, but you are entitled to do a monograph with no publications and still receive a degree award. And you don't have to decide straight away. Most universities allow you to switch between one or the other at least part of the way into your degree. Finally, I'll mention the methods section. We have another workshop for this, but at least when you're making your outline in the beginning, be aware of what kind of research you're doing and about the different designs and data collection methods that are available for that, because that informs the structure of your research and the structure of your outline. Do I know all of these research designs? No, I don't. I only know the ones that I'm doing in my project, right? The data gathering methods, I guess, yeah, I guess there's nothing really that inapproachable there, unapproachable there. But you don't need to know all of the designs. Pretty much when you're mapping out your methodology, you need to know enough to do this, right? You need to say, these designs and these methods are optional. In order to answer my research questions, it's possible that my project could use those methods. However, these ones are not suitable because of XYZ. Therefore, I'm choosing these ones. And the reasons why I think these are most appropriate are ABC, blah, blah, blah. So, when you're sort of mapping out your methodology part, just keep those 4 steps in mind, I think. What are the possible options? Why did you reject some? Which ones did you choose? And then why? How will they benefit the project? I also encourage you to get comfortable with referencing at the beginning of your higher education degree. You'll be doing this for years and making thousands of citations. So get comfy with whatever referencing style you're using. You can find CDU's referencing guides at that link. If you want to do some extra reading to fact check anything that I've told you today, there's the list of forms for a HDR student at CDU. And there's the list of policies that are relevant to your writing and research. You can go and do your own reading in those fields if you wish. Here are the tools that I think at a minimum you should be using when you're writing at master's or PhD level. The first one, even for native speakers, but more relevant to international students, is the Manchester Phrase Bank. It's got little chunks of language that can help you do any function in the research process. So let's say you want to describe results. It's got little chunks of result reporting language that you can adapt to your needs. You can do it for hedging and boosting language. You can do it for giving examples. You can use it for comparing and contrasting. It's super, super useful. I use it, and I think you should too. You can get it from here. Also, the rabbit search, especially if you're in the phase where you are doing a review of literature and looking for papers, is really useful. You take a source, preferably an influential source, a seminal source in your field, and you plug it into a research rabbit, and it will show you which sources your source drew from. It can also show you similar papers, and it can show you every article that has cited that source. So from those 3 lenses, you can really start to map out and get a good sort of visual picture of the literature. So if you're still in the beginning phase where you're collecting sources, find an important source, seminal source, an influential source in your field, plug it into there and start to play around with it. It's interactive. You can drag and move these little spider diagrams around. Super, super useful, guys. I would recommend you to play around with Gen AI in the planning phase. For example, the other day, I gave it a prompt like, you are a doctoral student, create a structure for a 100,000 word PhD about the dangers of secondhand smoke. And in 1 second, it produced something that was okay. I'm not saying you should get it to plan your research for you or plan your thesis structure for you, but it's certainly a very quick and convenient way to get an example of how a machine would organize a large piece of writing, and you can sort of pick and choose ideas and structural tips from it. But yeah, it shouldn't be your primary source. The supervisor should be your primary source. Finally, I recommend this textbook. It's free, Designing and Managing Your Research Project. You can download it from here. It'll take you through everything in the process from identifying a problem to publishing your work in a journal or article. So yeah, those are my tips. If you want to access more resources from CDU, this is what I recommend for you. The ORI calendar, Research and Innovation Events calendar, has always got something cool happening. I went to a workshop the other day, structuring your thesis. I also went to another one about doing a systematic review. Very, very useful. These are free. You can access most of the time remotely, and you can register or see the calendar through that link. The library also have our own separate set of workshops, everything from how to do academic writing to punctuation and pronunciation, down to how to use EndNote for referencing. So please keep that in mind. We do also have a massive bank of online self-study materials. We call it Study Skills. All of the assignment types or study skills or academic sort of tips. There's a page for basically everything on there. I highly recommend it. Even this, for example, it's like a model report that's annotated and highlighted, super useful if you wanted to understand how to structure an essay, for example. So give that a look. You can also get appointments with language and learning advisors, academic and research librarians, peer advisors, or HDR advisors. So keep that in mind. You're allowed to have one of those per week. And for general questions and queries, just ask the library at cdu.edu.au, and somebody has to answer that question promptly. So if you've got any feedback for me, you can get in touch with me on my email there or by scanning that link. And I'm always up for some feedback if you can think of any ways that I can improve these videos or these sessions. Peace, guys. Best of luck in your writing. Use the resources of the library if you can, and get in touch if you've got some suggestions or feedback, or if you want to make an appointment with me or someone on my team. Peace.